Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our presentation on autism and mental health in college. We have a great panel today with representatives from colleges and support programs, as well as a student. So I apologize if the titles are blocked slightly. This is today's panel. I'm Eric Endlick with Top College Consultants. And I'm going to show you a slide with all of our contact information. And if you're watching a recording, you can pause it so that you can get our contact information, or go back to this slide if you want. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so you can see all of our faces and we can get started with the discussion. Let's start by just briefly introducing ourselves so you can see who's on the panel. Again, I'm Eric Endlick. I'm a clinical psychologist and college admissions consultant. I work with students on the spectrum through the college application process. And I'm located in the Boston area, but I work with students all over the country. Sally, do you want to go next?
Yes, my name is Sally Burton-Hoyle. I'm a professor and then faculty advisor for a college supports program for college students that have been admitted to Eastern Michigan University.
Great, thanks. John?
Hello, everyone. John Conway, Director of Business Development and Admissions at Advance, which is a young adult transitional living program for students on the spectrum or neurodiverse. We are located in downtown Chicago and work with all the area colleges and universities, as well as working with young people who are either out of college or looking for a vocational path or a career path as well. So happy to be here.
Thanks, John. Allison?
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Highland. I'm the Assistant Director of the Ross Center for Disability Services at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, colloquially known as UMass-Boston. I provide accommodations for students with disabilities as well as general support for their experience as a student with a disability at UMass.
Great, thank you. Jenna?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Knaus. I'm a clinician and also a program director here at the College Internship Program. We're located in the Berkshires, but also have locations across the country, 5 different locations. And we have our comprehensive program supports students on the spectrum in social skills, independent living skill development, and clinical work as they navigate either a career or academic setting.
Thank you. Alex?
Sure. My name is Alex Morris-Wood. I'm the Director of Transition Services and Outreach at Beacon College, which is a 4-year college for students with learning differences in Central Florida. I oversee all of our short-term transition to college programs for students with diagnosed learning differences, grades 9 through postgraduate. And I also oversee our admissions operations at Beacon and conduct all of our professional outreach on behalf of the college.
Thank you, Alex. And how about you, Hunter?
My name is Hunter White, and I'm a senior psychology major at Dean College in Franklin, Mass., and I'm a college student on the autism spectrum.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to address questions to specific folks, but anyone is welcome to jump in and add your 2 cents as well. Why don't we start with you, Alex? Can you say something about how you see autism impacting the management of conditions such as anxiety and depression, how autism makes it either easier or perhaps sometimes harder to cope with these issues? Say a little about the interface between autism and mental health in college students.
Sure, and I think a large part is that we're seeing some adjustments in the presentation of mental health because of COVID. So I think we have to look at the before and after, unfortunately. We all know that mental health issues definitely come with a diagnosis of ASD. And I think for college, because it's such an unpredictable environment that you can't plan every single step of the way, it does lead to an increase in anxiety. And then when you're on a college campus, you're facing new triggers that might be unfamiliar to you. And you're gonna have a reaction that might spike your anxiety or might spark a depressive episode that is new or could be looked at differently because you're in a new environment. However, the really great thing that I see with students who have an autism spectrum diagnosis prior to entering college is they're more receptive to help. They have been in the system for a little longer, so they do not stigmatize support. So I would say definitely at Beacon College, those students with an autism spectrum diagnosis are more likely to self-advocate, are more likely to engage with support services and receive feedback in a much appropriate way because they've had such practice. So while there definitely would be an increase in anxiety and depression, especially in an even more unknown environment like COVID, you can't plan for the unpredictable right now. I've seen our students with ASD just really latch on to their correct resources appropriately and persist on campus, which has been remarkable.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious about that, being receptive to services. Sally, you're in a different university setting. What do you see in terms of students being on the spectrum, being receptive to services in college?
Well, it's how they're wired, you know, kind of where they are in the spectrum, but it also has to do with when they were diagnosed. If a student went to University of Michigan without an autism diagnosis, had just been looked at as, oh, he has some issues with depression and things like that, and then they totally tank, that's usually then when an autism diagnosis may emerge if there's, you know, quality, you know, psychiatric and assessment services. So when those students have gotten a late diagnosis, they are much less wanting help. But that also can be people that got a diagnosis when they were 14 and they just have never wanted, they've never wanted that kind of help. And yeah, so that's been our experience over many years.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to weigh in on this topic before we go on to another question?
I would add that go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say really quickly what Sally brought up that was interesting is the difference between reactive versus proactive counseling. And what I'm seeing is students with an autism spectrum disorder are more likely to engage in clinical services proactively and not see it as a consequence to a setback. Yeah, sorry, John.
No, that's a good point. And I was going to say something sort of similar. As a program that sort of works ad hoc or in addition to the services that many college students are receiving or should be receiving, I would say we see both populations. We do get sort of the senior that graduated from high school that understands the full value of those supportive services, but knows they're going to need some additional supports beyond what the college provides, especially typically in the mental health arena. And so they're looking for a program maybe like ours, residential or non-residential, that can help fill those gaps. But we also do get that student who maybe tries it on their own and isn't quite prepared or doesn't quite get enough support. And then they're often coming to us maybe a little bit burnt or a little bit feeling like they should have been able to do it themselves. There's some guilt associated with that. So sometimes we have to sort of help reorient that whole self-advocacy piece. And that's one of the parts of our program that I think we do pretty well, is we do teach our students, if they don't have those skills already, how to really self-advocate for themselves. So.
Yeah, self-advocacy is huge, and it also goes along with self-awareness because you need to know what you don't know. If you're aware that you struggle in a certain area, you're going to be, when you're open with yourself about that, it's going to be easier to reach out for help.
Exactly.
Anybody else want to comment on that topic of, okay. Question for you, Allison. As parents prepare to send their children off to college, what steps should they consider or be thinking about for the best possible mental health outcomes in college? What things should they be doing while kids are still in high school or as they're making that transition?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head, Eric. The knowledge, the self-awareness, and the self-advocacy, I think, are two of the biggest keys. I would say practice the transition to a new environment. Let your student know that this is going to be a very new environment, and there are ways to prepare for that. One is students should understand their actual disability as well as they can, including the diagnosis, the treatment, the contents of their IEP if they have one in high school, or whatever kinds of support that they did have in high school or secondary school. Knowledge really empowers a person to be able to effectively self-advocate. They should also understand their comorbidity if they have it. Sometimes students might present with one thing and then self-diagnose with another, and yet not even mention something else that's part of their documentation. Sometimes they come to us not knowing what their disability is, what the diagnosis actually is, not fully understanding it. So I think understanding it inside and out and really embracing it and feeling empowered by that is so important, that self-awareness. Another thing that can help with the transition is understanding the notable and significant differences between high school and college. One of the key differences that we find students don't necessarily know or are sometimes caught off guard by is that accommodations in high school or secondary school look very different than they may in college. There are a couple of notable examples of that. For example, if a student had a classroom aide or the ability to be able to ask clarifying questions. That's something that we would find other support pieces for in college, but that aren't necessarily accommodations in themselves. The other important thing is that in high school, sometimes modification of the curriculum is possible. In college, it is not. The reasonable accommodation can't fundamentally alter the course, as we know. But that's something I think to begin not only talking to your student about, but to begin asking questions about at the college that they're or institution that they plan to attend. What does the major really look like? Is there a foreign language requirement, for example? Are there other things that are part of the program that may require some advanced preparation or some knowledge about coming down the pike? Um, I think also the self-advocacy piece is one of the most important pieces of practice a student can have before they come to college. As we know, in elementary school or high school, students are required to be identified by their school districts if they're in a public school district, and it's required that they're given an IEP. In college, the student has to approach the Disability Services Office and self-identify and offer documentation, and then sit for a registration appointment, which is great practice for the interactive process. I think it's particularly important for students to know that in that process they have a voice and that that process gives them a voice. So knowing their diagnosis and being able to discuss it, advocate for themselves, understanding comorbidity, understanding that there are going to be some differences in the college experience, I think are all ways that students can be their own best self-advocate. I think one more thing I would mention is students should understand that particularly with ASD, but really with anything, they're going to present very differently than their friends or peers or classmates might. So they're not going to have the same necessarily the same set of accommodations. They are their own unique person with their own unique set of strengths and all of the things that go with that. The reasonable accommodations that will be offered in college through the interactive process are going to honor the uniqueness of their own diagnosis. So I think understanding that they're not cookie cutter, they don't look like everyone else, they shouldn't expect to have the same list of accommodations can go a far way in helping them be empowered self-advocates. The interactive process in college and beyond really does mean that the student has a voice.
That's a great summary of the differences between high school and college and things that families should be thinking about. Anyone want to add to that?
Well, I think it's important that you question the individual and their families, because if accommodations, if in high school they said it was an accommodation, but in reality it was a modification, then they're not going to be able to have that in college. So sometimes a little bit of education with parents has to happen.
I also think that looking beyond the accommodation office to get services is so key, especially as it pertains to mental health. I always tell families to really research the counseling center at a college, see how many clinicians are on staff for the amount of students that go to the college, and create a more concrete and separate mental health plan with their student when it comes to individual counseling or pharmacological interventions that might need to happen, because there is this misconception that people at a disabilities office are going to oversee that process, when in reality, it's a completely separate entity from the accommodations that they receive.
I'll add to that and just share that we often encourage our students who are transitioning to a four-year university to be proactive about putting together their support team, which could include, and to think about all the people that they'll need to bring with them, so to speak. And that may include a clinician, or at least knowing that I need to find a clinician and look at the counseling center as separate from the disability office. Do I need a life coach to help me with some things in my apartment? But we try to normalize that idea that we all actually need support teams. We all we have to learn that being part of being a healthy adult is also recognizing that we're interdependent, meaning to some extent, we all depend on people, right? We have this idea that we reach adulthood and suddenly we're on our own and we can do everything. And it's just not true. I can name, 2 or 3 people that I consider are part of my support team. And so we try to normalize that idea and help our students think about who they need on that team.
I like that idea of a team, and I think the obvious component of the team, as Alex pointed out, would be like a counselor from the counseling center. But you might develop a connection to a professor who becomes a mentor, and that professor could really be key to your mental health. You may really rely on informal, not counseling, but informal support from that professor, from your peers in the residence hall, a club that you join, a team that you're on. And some colleges have mental health oriented clubs, as well as obviously you could feel supported by peers in any club. So I do think that's good to think of it as sort of a whole team. And another component that is sometimes executive function coaching, which coaching for organization and time management, which is available at some colleges, but not most colleges. So if that's something students need, they need to be thinking about, which colleges provide that service or how they can get it from outside of the college if necessary.
Can I just add to that too? I really wanted to second Alex's point of looking beyond just accommodations and beyond the Disability Services Office. We do a lot of referrals in our office to counseling, to different forms of coaching, but what else is there that can support a student in their mental health? As Eric is mentioning, it could be mentorship with professors, social networks, and things like this. A peer mentor program is a really powerful thing, particularly for students with ASD. Our office offers a couple of different versions, not as accommodations, but support referrals to a couple of different versions of coaching. One of them is a mental health based coaching, and one of them is executive functioning based coaching. The executive functioning based coaching resides in our office. The other resides in the psychology department. And students can be treated by doctoral students and so forth. And essentially it's coaching to help them balance the mental health aspects of their experience in school. So as part of our intake process and the conversation that we're having, we pick that apart a little bit. What kinds of things do you think you could use support with? Is it time management and organization, or is it dealing with depression in a new location, or anxiety during a pandemic and being a first-year student?
And I think all those things interplay, because if you're struggling with time management, that could raise your anxiety level. Anxiety doesn't exist in a vacuum. It gets triggered by other things. And if you can't get your anxiety under control, you could start getting depressed. We've been talking a lot about the transition to college. I'm wondering, Hunter, if you have any advice for students who are, planning for college, like what do you wish you knew in high school, or what do you think students should know before, as they get ready to go to college?
I think I can definitely agree with a lot of excellent points that were made earlier. I think it's important for the student to understand themselves, because self-awareness is definitely key and critical to being able to succeed in college. Because if you don't know yourself really that well, you're not going to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. But speaking from my own personal experiences, I remember when I was in high school and I always wanted to go to college, I looked at colleges that were good and with supports and support networks and offering a lot of academic support, because as someone with a learning difference, I knew I was going to need support during college. So that was definitely important for me to know in order to know what colleges would work out for me. So I think that's really important. But I think it's also important to understand that everyone with autism is different and support will vary from individual to individual. So that's also important to understand. I think college is an excellent way to grow into adulthood. I mean, I've definitely made a lot of gains throughout my college experience. I'm a senior now. So I think it's definitely good to be equipped with tools to handle uncertainty, especially now with what we're going through with this coronavirus pandemic. Me getting used to dealing with uncertainty, I feel like has helped me sort of manage the current situation that we're in. So, and my college experience has been wonderful. I've joined a lot of clubs on campus. I've joined the cross country team. So I've been a student athlete, and I recently became the captain for my cross country team. So I've definitely been involved in many ways. And I'm also the buddy director of the Best Buddies program at Dean College, where I help out local young adults in the community that also have differences as well. And I'm a mentor to a young man that has more severe autism. So college has definitely opened up a lot of doors for me, and I look forward to seeing what lays ahead.
You're a busy guy. That's fantastic. You mentioned dealing with uncertainty and how much uncertainty there is now during the pandemic. Of course, uncertainty is one of the big drivers of anxiety. And one of the ways people deal with it, and there's many different ways, but one is sort of looking for reassurance. Is it going to be okay? Is school going to be back in session? How are things going to turn out? But as you pointed out, Hunter, part of becoming more resilient and managing your anxiety is learning to tolerate uncertainty. We may not have all the answers right away, and we're going to have to be okay with that. And that's a big development, but it's important.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Allison was talking a bit about sort of what parents should know, and I'm wondering from you, Jen, and you'll have to unmute, what role you feel parents should play in the process of students seeking supports and making a successful transition. What do parents need to know about, how do you set appropriate expectations for what parents should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing? And John, I'm sure you'll have thoughts about this too.
Sure, yeah, I think we know that parents up to this point have kind of been what we call the super advocates. Our founder talks about having a steel umbilical cord up to this point. And so I think it's a really hard, you have to strike a balance, right, between continuing to advocate because your young adults still need support at this stage in their life. It just looks different. And also, letting the young adult try things on their own and make mistakes and fail. And always say, like, it's okay to scrape your knee, but we'll try not to, we'll try to help you refrain from breaking your leg. And so I think where parents can be proactive ahead of time with their young adult and setting up that, helping them find the professionals that they may need as part of that support team, that support network is certainly helpful. And also then to some extent, trusting that then those people kind of have it at that point with their young adult, and trusting that the young adult can advocate enough for themselves to share, to say what they need and to bring it to those professionals and to redirect the young person to, asking questions like, who do you think you should talk to about that? And kind of acting as their surrogate frontal lobe and trying to help them problem solve without actually problem solving for them, but asking those open-ended questions like, who do you think you can go to in that, with this problem? Is there anything I can help with right now, just so you can talk it through? Can I help you put together a plan? Can I help you script something out? Would that be helpful to you? Or just, can I just be a listener here? We talk a lot about kind of enabling behavior and encourage our parents to look at their own behavior and why they're doing what they're doing, and what's it about? Is it to help their student, support their student to get to that next stage of development, or is it to alleviate their own anxiety, whatever they're doing at the time in conversation with their young adult? But I think we provide a lot of parent coaching in our program just because I think it's really hard to define and carry out what it means to have a healthy adult-child relationship. And I think that's true for every person. It's a hard transition to go through with our parents, with our children. And so we talk a lot about all those things, where am I enabling versus allowing my young adult to, grow and do something on their own, even though they might not quite do it the way I would like them to do it. And do they know enough about self-advocacy in this situation to say at least what they're struggling with, so that the person understands and can then help them from there.
Yeah, I'm an autism dad, so I can definitely relate to what you were talking about as far as that umbilical cord, and you get so involved as a parent helping your child access services and so on, that it's very difficult to know when and how much to sort of pull back. Does anyone want to add on to what Jenna was?
I was going to say that we have students in our college support program across the spectrum. Those are students that get admitted with a ACT of 16 and those with SATs of 1600. So the spectrum is very wide. So it's all dependent, and it's dependent on the way that their parents have manifested their understanding of autism. So if the parents had the goal of self-determination for their children to grow up and, and move on, then they're very much teaching them self-advocacy skills. We have a lot of students that really do not have any idea how to do that, and they can grow into it. By junior, senior year, they've really come quite a way. But also we make sure parents feel welcome and included, because they are the content experts on their son or daughter. And then because they can get tired, of being parents. So then we encourage them to let us do it. Because it's easier for somebody else to do it. I'm a sibling of somebody with autism, and it was always easier for me than it was my parents to do things with my brother. So
I think you brought up such a good point, because in Navigator Prep, which is our college transition program, we work with students going to colleges across the United States a year before they enter, for both parents and students for that reason. I feel like when I work with parents, the number one thing they say is there's such an abrupt transition from having control to having no control, and there's not a lot of education and training that happens to deal with that adjustment that Jenna was talking about. So I think a large part is just providing very matter-of-fact education. I think we get so bombarded with walking through the difference between IDEA and ADA, and I think we just need to be very realistic about, this is literally the changes that are just going to happen. And what can you do in your own bridge? What does your transition look like as you start to lose that control? Because that's a really tough developmental milestone that I feel like parents don't get enough credit for. And I love that you all do coaching and training, because it's really what's needed. Is they're such the integral part of the support team.
We talk, these are all excellent points, and we do many of the same things. In fact, our whole staff team, part of their training is really learning how to understand the perspective of the parent. We invite our parents to be, active participants in the program, meaning they can pick up the phone at any time and call either myself or our program director. We have therapeutic life coaches on staff, a full-time academic coordinator, a career and social engagement coordinator. There's many touch points that we have with our students, but probably in this regard, one of our most important aspects, like Jenna's program, is the parent coach, which we also have on staff, who has a background in family therapy and really understands the nuances of this. And the way he frames it a lot is in terms of a gift, right? Like, as Jenna put it, as parents, you are the super advocates, but you also understand that this is a skill that your son or daughter is going to need to master for themselves, and what a gift it is for you to bestow that upon them. And that could mean that you stop altogether what it is you're doing, because their ability to be an advocate for themselves is probably very different than what your ability was as a parent to do that for them, right? So, and the way they do it, the methods, the comfort level, how direct or indirect they're going to be, all those things are very different. So it's really learning how to be a cheerleader for the student and advocate for them to learn that advocacy themselves. We spend a lot of time with our parents talking about that and honoring the role that they've played up until this point, and then saying, now you get to take a break. and wave those pom-poms and be the cheerleader, right? Because that's what we want you to be.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I would second everything that everyone is saying. And I would also suggest that parents understand the environment that their student is entering. So Hunter and I were together at a school where it's highly encouraged for students to sign a release, and the parents are encouraged to be very involved. So it was completely regular for us to, as administrators, talk to parents all day, every day. Now at a public institution, I have a very different experience. We gently encourage students to come meet with us on their own, and they can sign some paperwork and include their parent. But sometimes we notice that students have a different demeanor or a different honesty level even, or a different understanding of what they need when they're alone versus when they're with their parent. So we always encourage students to meet with us alone and self-advocate, but where is your student going? What is the environment there? And just a second, what everyone has been saying about, and I think Hunter put it so articulately, that you are in college transitioning to your full adulthood. You're really kind of blooming. And the interactive process in college for accommodations mirrors that of the real world, mirrors that of jobs in a very different way than does secondary school. So it's the interactive process. You're providing documentation, you're advocating for, you are seeking it out, and it can be excellent practice for students to be out in the quote unquote real world and advocate for accommodations in their employment situation.
In the college support program, one of the requirements is that FERPA is waived because, in my experience, for many, many years, students that were brilliant flunked out of great schools because they didn't, and I look at it with autism as a communication impairment, not really as lying, but their parents would say, "How are you doing in class?" And they would say, "Good, Mom, I'm good, I'm good." Well, no, they were not good. And so then that's why our students have academic support coaches, and they reach out to faculty once a month. And then I do training with faculty all over our university. But if we didn't have that, a lot of students would fall between the cracks. And so, and we've never had anybody argue with it either, students or parents. And it's kind of important, we think.
Great, thank you. Just one last question before I want to open it up to audience questions. John, you may have some thoughts, Hunter, any of you really, on this. And that is, we've been talking about things from what can the student and the family do. What about from the college side of things? In a perfect world, if we could change the college environment to be more conducive to the mental health of students. And I'm talking about the physical environment, the social environment, the cultural environment. What would make for a better environment for students on the spectrum if we could make some changes?
That's a fantastic question. We pride ourselves in really building relationships and alliances with all the schools that our students attend in the Chicagoland area. There are many to choose from, but there's probably a few that we work with most closely, and we've put a lot of time and effort into developing relationships with the disabilities department, with the counseling department, like everyone's talked about, that interplay and that exchange that needs to happen. But that's also a requirement of our program. And we, like Sally said, we also require that our students sign consents for release of information for everybody, because we know that we have to be able to communicate with parents and their therapists and everyone else. That doesn't mean that we don't honor their right to confidentiality. By all means, we want them to have safe spaces to talk to people, but we want to make sure that the broad strokes are being covered, right? So in terms of what can help us in colleges in general, I think the same thing is that understanding that protecting the information of the student is important, but there's also a point in time where they need help and support, and the student isn't always the best advocate in the moment, and the parents aren't always the best advocate in the moment, because sometimes the agendas might be competing. So it really is connecting and reaching out and empowering and advocating as much as you can, but also having a good understanding of when it might be time to pick up the phone and make a call on behalf of that student. And I would suggest that that's probably a departmental or interdepartmental conversation, right? To talk to all we talked about teams and how do you create your team, utilizing all the members of that team at the school, at the university and college to help figure out, okay, who might be the best person to reach out to the student, which might even be another student or the RA on the floor or the counseling department or someone or a professor. But also recognizing in that team approach that at some point maybe more needs to be done, and how do you make that connection?
Great. What about you, Hunter? Any thoughts about what you wish colleges knew that would make it more conducive for the mental health of students on the spectrum?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think having regular check-ins with the counseling center is important, especially for first-year students that are dealing with a lot of transition from high school to college. Especially being away from home for the first time is really a big adjustment, and that can definitely take a toll on the mental health. Like when I first started college, I saw a counselor for my first semester, and that really helped me ease into the transition of college. Although that's looking at a short-term problem, like the long term is the 4 years of college. Things do change in college. People meet other people, they make friends, and they try new things. And for some it gets better, for some the challenges. I mean, as a freshman, academically it's not too hard, but then like by the time junior and senior year rolls around, there are challenges with the workload increasing, especially because you're taking classes more related to your major and the level of critical thinking is deeper. So those are challenges to navigate as well. If I had to think of something that all colleges could do to ensure the mental health of students, I was thinking maybe doing some kind of like daily check-in. It could be like maybe creating an app where students can fill out how they're feeling, and they can fill out their feelings honestly. And if they feel okay or good, I guess continued check-ins could be good. But also, if they need support emotionally, they could be, there could be like some kind of online app or maybe they could just go to the counseling center and continue getting. I mean, there's so many support services. It's not just about academics. It's about everything. I think mental health and well-being is not really talked about or really looked at enough. So I think there's a lot of challenges with that. So I think encouragement can go a long way. But the hard thing is sometimes people, especially students, might not want to admit how they're really feeling. Like they might say they feel okay or fine when really they might be struggling. So that's also another thing to keep in mind of. So we have to encourage students to be honest about their feelings and to know that sometimes it's okay to not be okay. Sometimes we have harder days than others, but
Yeah. Well,
that's basically my line of.
well said. What I would like to see is the concept of diversity expanded to include neurodiversity, so that colleges are talking about neurodiversity, welcoming neurodiversity, and seeing that as part of the full spectrum of neurodiversity on campus, so that all students feel welcome. Well, I want to give some time for question and answer, so let's stop here and give the audience time for questions for any of the panelists.